What if I told you over 50% of jazz legends couldn't escape chilling deaths and heartbreaking disasters at the peak of their careers? From Clifford Brown's shocking highway tragedy to Esbjörn Svensson's mysterious diving accident, here are 20 worst fatal accidents in jazz history. 1. Glenn Miller. Miller was one of the biggest names in swing music. His songs, like In the Mood and Moonlight Serenade, made people dance and brought joy before World War II. But Miller was more than a musician. He wanted to serve his country. When the war began, he left behind his successful career and joined the Army Air Forces. He believed music could lift soldiers' spirits and hurt the enemy's confidence. As leader of the Army Air Forces band, he performed for troops, bringing hope to the battlefield. On a cold December morning in 1944, Glenn Miller boarded a small UC-64 Norseman plane to Paris. His band was set to play for soldiers celebrating the liberation of France. But the plane never arrived. It vanished over the English Channel without a trace. No distress call, no wreckage, nothing. Many searches were made, but the plane was never found. Theories spread quickly. Some said the plane had engine trouble and crashed. Others believed the pilot got lost in thick fog. A darker theory suggested the plane was accidentally hit by bombs dropped from Allied aircraft returning from a mission. Some even claimed Miller had secretly disappeared in Paris. The truth remains unknown. His music still plays today, but his mysterious fate is a chilling reminder that even legends can disappear. 2. Jaco Pastorius. Pastorius changed how the electric bass was played. He removed the frets from his bass, making it sound smooth and unique. He could make the bass sing like no one had before. With the band Weather Report, he mixed jazz, rock, and funk, creating a new kind of music. He was a genius, but his life was full of struggles. By the 1980s, his life had fallen apart. He struggled with bipolar disorder and had problems with substance use. He went from playing to huge crowds to living on the streets of Florida. In 1987, Jaco Pastorius showed up at a nightclub in Wilton Manors, Florida. He was barefoot and disheveled. When the bouncer refused to let him in, Jaco got angry and hit the club's door. What happened next was tragic. The bouncer, Luc Hauven, beat Jaco badly, smashing his skull. Jaco was rushed to the hospital and fell into a coma. He fought for 10 days, but his injuries were too severe. He died at just 35 years old. His attacker got only a short prison sentence, which felt like an insult to Jaco's fans and fellow musicians. Though Jaco was gone, his music and influence lived on. Every bassist who pushes the limits of their instrument carries a piece of Jaco's legacy. His voice may have fallen silent, but his sound will never fade. 3. Clifford Brown. Brown played the trumpet with amazing skill. His sound was smooth, his solos full of life. He worked hard to make every note perfect. Unlike some jazz musicians, Brown stayed away from trouble and focused only on his music. By the early 1950s, he was rising fast, playing with greats like Max Roach. His songs, like Joy Spring, were filled with energy and promise. It seemed like he had a long, bright future ahead, but life had other plans. On a rainy night in June 1956, Clifford Brown was on the road, traveling from Philadelphia to Chicago for a show. He was with pianist Richie Powell and Powell's wife Nancy, who was driving. The rain poured hard as they sped down the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The road was wet and dangerous. Near Bedford, the car lost control and skidded off the highway. The crash was deadly. All 3 of them died instantly. Brown was only 25 years old. His death shocked the jazz world. He was just getting started, yet he had already changed how the trumpet was played. Many musicians after him, like Freddie Hubbard and Wynton Marsalis, were inspired by his style. His recordings are still studied and admired today. No one knows how far he could have gone, but even in his short life, he left behind a legacy that still shines. His talent came like a flash of lightning, bright, powerful, and gone too soon. 4. Lee Morgan. Morgan was one of the most exciting trumpet players in jazz. As a teenager, he was already playing with the great Dizzy Gillespie. His bold, powerful sound made him a key figure in the hard bop movement. In the 1960s, Morgan reached his peak. His song, The Sidewinder, became a hit, mixing blues with jazz in a fresh way. But while his music soared, his life was falling apart. Morgan struggled with opioid addiction. It almost ended his career, but then he met Helen, a woman who helped him get clean and return to the stage. They were close, but their relationship was stormy. On a freezing night in February 1972, Lee Morgan was playing at Slug's Saloon, a jazz club in New York. Helen was there too, watching him from the crowd. Outside, a snowstorm raged. Inside, tensions rose. They argued in front of everyone. Helen left, but she soon returned with a gun. A single shot rang out. Morgan clutched his chest and collapsed. People panicked, but the heavy snow delayed the ambulance. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was only 33. Helen was arrested and later convicted of manslaughter. She spent a few years in prison before fading from the public eye. The jazz world was left in shock. Morgan's bright career was cut short in the most tragic way. His music still plays, his trumpet still sings, but his story remains one of the saddest in jazz history. 5. Scott LaFaro. LaFaro didn't just play the bass. He changed how people saw it. Born in 1936, he played with a smooth, creative style that made him stand out. Instead of just keeping the rhythm, he turned the bass into a voice of its own, weaving melodies that few had ever heard from the instrument. Playing alongside pianist Bill Evans and drummer Paul Motian, he helped create a new kind of jazz, one that felt more like a deep conversation between musicians. Their greatest work came in June 1961, recorded live at the Village Vanguard. The music was light, daring, and full of feeling. It was as if the three musicians were speaking to each other through their instruments, pushing the limits of jazz. LaFaro wasn't just playing bass. He was shaping the future of music. Then, just 10 days later, everything stopped. On July 6, 1961, Scott LaFaro was driving near Geneva, New York. It was dark and the road was slick. He lost control of his car, crashing into a tree. The car caught fire, leaving nothing behind. He was only 25 years old. His death shook the jazz world. Bill Evans was devastated. He barely played for months, and when he finally did, his music carried the sadness of losing his friend. LaFaro had only just begun to change jazz, yet his influence spread quickly. His recordings with Evans are still admired today, inspiring every bassist who hears them. He was gone too soon, but in a few short years, he changed everything. What could he have created if he had lived longer? 6. Esbjørn Svensson. Svensson brought something new to jazz. His music wasn't just notes, it was an experience. Born in Sweden in the mid-20th century, he mixed classical music with rock, creating a fresh, exciting sound. His trio, EST, changed how people saw jazz, adding raw energy to the traditional piano trio. Albums like Tuesday Wonderland and Strange Place for Snow were cinematic, unpredictable, and haunting. Svensson wasn't just a musician, he was an innovator, pulling listeners into new worlds with his melody. As his fame grew, so did his influence. Concert halls across Europe and Asia filled with fans eager to hear his groundbreaking music. Every performance felt like an adventure, blending calm moments with bursts of wild improvisation. He seemed unstoppable, his future full of endless possibilities. His music pushed boundaries, proving that jazz could be both experimental and accessible. The way he played the piano felt like storytelling, taking listeners on a journey with every note. His ability to blend genres made his sound unforgettable, appealing to jazz lovers and newcomers alike. Even those unfamiliar with jazz could feel the power of his music, drawn in by its emotion and intensity. Then, tragedy struck. In the summer of 2008, Svensson went diving in the Stockholm archipelago. It was a place of beauty, but also hidden dangers. He had dived there before, but something went wrong that day. He lost consciousness underwater, disappearing beneath the surface. No one knows exactly what happened, whether it was equipment failure, lack of oxygen, or something else. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was only 44 years old. The jazz world was in shock. A musician at his peak, shaping the future of jazz, was suddenly gone. Fans mourned not just what had been lost, but what could have been. His music, full of endless possibilities, became a frozen moment in time, an echo of what was left unfinished. Bob Berg. Berg's saxophone wasn't just an instrument, it was pure energy. His music was loud, fast, and full of emotion. He studied at Juilliard, then joined jazz legend Horace Silver. By the late 1900s, Berg was famous for his powerful style, blending classic jazz with rock-inspired solos. Playing with Miles Davis, he pushed the limits of jazz fusion. His albums Back Roads and Enter the Spirit proved his talent, mixing skill with deep feeling. But even great musicians can't escape fate. On a cold night in 2002, Bob Berg was driving near his home in New York when disaster struck. A cement truck lost control on the ice and crashed into his car. The impact was brutal. In seconds, one of jazz's brightest stars was gone. There was no warning, no sign that his last song had already been played. He was still making music, still creating, but the road took him before he could play again. His recordings remain, full of the fire that made him unforgettable. 8. Don Myrick. Myrick's saxophone was the soul of many songs. His smooth, strong sound shaped the music of Earth, Wind and Fire. From Reasons to That's the Way of the World, his solos stood out. As a member of the Phoenix Horns, he played with stars like Phil Collins and Carlos Santana. His saxophone spoke when words failed, expressing emotions too deep for lyrics. But talent doesn't protect against tragedy. By the early 1990s, Myrick had left the spotlight. His influence was still strong, but his life was quieter. Then, on a summer day in 1993, everything changed. Police came to his Los Angeles home with a search warrant. When Don Myrick answered the door, he held a small butane lighter. In a split second, an officer misjudged the situation. A gun fired. The bullet hit Myrick in the chest. Just like that, his music was silenced forever. The report called it a mistake, an error that couldn't be undone. But for those who loved his music, the explanation didn't erase the pain. His life ended not from age, sickness, or an accident, but from a moment that never should have happened. Jazz is about improvisation and unexpected turns, but too often, its stars are taken too soon. The stage goes dark, the last note never played. How many more talents have been lost before their time? And how many stories like these remain forgotten, waiting to be told? 9. Jerry Niewood. On a cold night in February 2009, jazz lost two great musicians in a tragic plane crash. Jerry Niewood, a talented saxophonist, and Coleman Mellett, a skilled guitarist, boarded Continental Airlines Flight 3407 from Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York. But the flight never made it. Ice buildup on the wings, and a mistake in the cockpit led to disaster. The plane spiraled out of control, crashing into a quiet neighborhood. 49 people on board died, along with one person on the ground. It was one of the worst plane crashes in U.S. history. Niewood's saxophone had filled jazz clubs and recordings with smooth, rich tones for decades. He played alongside Chuck Mangione, helping to shape fusion jazz. Mellett, a rising star, was known for his complex guitar work. They were on their way to a concert that never happened. Their deaths left a painful hole in the jazz world. Mangione, who had played with Niewood since the 1960s, was devastated. He had also seen great potential in Mellett's future. The crash led to a deep investigation into airline safety. Experts found that pilot fatigue and poor de-icing procedures contributed to the accident. Afterward, safety rules were tightened and training improved, but for the jazz world, these changes came too late. All that remained were the recordings and memories of two lost talents. 10. Julia Cleveland. Cleveland's drumming was full of energy, sharp, rhythmic, and alive. She was a well-loved figure in Canada's jazz scene, a mentor to young musicians, and a star in Toronto's club. Her career was on the rise. A new album was in the works, and she was ready for the next big step. But one reckless driver changed everything. On a September evening in 2024, the city was alive with lights and music. The show had just ended, and the audience was still buzzing when Julia Cleveland walked home, unaware of the danger ahead. A speeding car ran a red light, crashing into another vehicle. The impact sent one of the cars spinning onto the sidewalk, right into her path. In a split second, her music was silenced. Her death shook the jazz world. Fans mourned. Fellow musicians spoke out. How could a city filled with music allow its streets to be so dangerous? Outrage grew over reckless driving and weak traffic laws, but no amount of anger could bring back Cleveland's talent, her mentorship, her passion. Her final recordings still pulse with life, a reminder of the artist she was and the legend she could have become. But she would not be the last jazz musician to meet a tragic end. 11. Andrew Speight. Speight's saxophone wasn't just an instrument, it was part of him. Born in Australia, he became a jazz master, wowing crowds with his music. In San Francisco, he wasn't just a performer, he was a teacher, helping young musicians find their sound. But no one saw the tragic twist that would end his life. On a February night in 2022, Andrew Speight's car got stuck on train tracks in Burlingame, California. What happened? A wrong turn? Car trouble? No one knows for sure. What is certain is that as he tried to escape, a commuter train hit his vehicle, dragging it down the tracks. Before the wreckage could settle, a second train coming from the opposite direction smashed into it again. The force of the impact left no chance of survival. The jazz world was in shock. Students, fellow musicians, and fans mourned the loss of a man whose music had inspired so many. He had spent his life teaching others to improvise, yet his own fate was something no one could have predicted. His recordings keep his music alive, but his real legacy lives on in the students he mentored. Every note they play carries a piece of his spirit. His name remains in jazz history, not just for his talent, but for the passion he brought to his art. 12. Eddie Costa. Costa was a powerhouse on the piano and vibraphone. Born in Pennsylvania in 1930, he stood out for his sharp harmonies and high-energy style. While most musicians focused on one instrument, he mastered two. His piano playing was bold, full of rhythm and emotion, while his vibraphone work was smooth and intricate. By the 1950s, Eddie Costa had recorded with jazz greats, becoming a major voice in post-bop jazz. But his career ended in a flash. Late one night in July 1962, he was driving in New York City when his car veered off the road. Some say he was speeding, others blame bad road conditions. Either way, the crash was devastating. He died from his injuries at just 31 years old. In an instant, jazz lost a rising star. Costa was on the verge of pushing jazz in new directions. His music showed glimpses of where he might have gone next, but instead of evolving, his career was frozen in time. His recordings give us a taste of his genius, but they leave behind a haunting question. What could he have achieved if he had just a little more time? 13. Warne Marsh. Not like other jazz musicians, Warne Marsh played the saxophone, but instead of wild, flashy solos, he focused on precision. Born in Los Angeles in 1927, he learned from Lenny Tristano, mastering long, flowing phrases and complex harmonies. While others chased fast, fiery notes, Marsh played with calm and control, creating music that was deep and thoughtful. He was not a big name, but true jazz lovers respected him. His music was like a puzzle, each note placed with care, each phrase connected with purpose. He played for those who truly listened, those who could hear the depth in his sound. Then, on a December night in 1987, everything ended in an unexpected way. He was performing at Dante's, a famous jazz club in Los Angeles. His solo that night had something special, a little extra fire. Then, in the middle of a note, he collapsed. At first, the audience thought it might be part of the show. But when he didn't get up, when the music truly stopped, the terrible truth became clear. Marsh had suffered a massive heart attack and died right there on stage. He spent his life perfecting his craft, and in the end, he left this world the same way he had lived, playing jazz, lost in the music. He played until his very last breath, his saxophone still in his hands. The way he passed shocked the jazz world. His recordings continued to inspire saxophonists, keeping his skill and passion alive, but his final performance remains one of jazz's most unforgettable moments. His last notes still hang in the air, a reminder that, for some, Music is not just an art, it's a way of life, a force that carries them to the very end. 14. Joe Maney. A different kind of saxophonist, Joe Maney was fast, fearless, and full of energy, a rising star in the West Coast jazz scene. Born in 1930, he played alongside some of the biggest names in jazz. His talent was undeniable, his improvisation sharp and exciting, but his reckless spirit didn't stay on stage. It followed him into real life. He loved excitement, chaos, and risk, but that thrill would lead to his downfall. One night in May 1964, Maney was at a party with friends, laughing, drinking, enjoying himself. Someone had a loaded handgun. It was passed around like a toy, a careless joke in the middle of the fun. Some say Maney was showing off, twirling it in his hand. Others say it was just an accident. The exact truth is lost in the blur of that night, but one thing is certain. The gun went off, and a single bullet struck him in the head. He died instantly. What started as a night of music and laughter ended in sudden, senseless tragedy. The jazz world was stunned. A brilliant musician, gone in an instant. He was only 33 years old, with a career that should have lasted decades longer. Instead, his name became a warning, a reminder of how quickly life can change. His recordings with Louis Bellson and Maynard Ferguson remain proof of his talent. But one question lingers. What could he have achieved if not for one reckless moment? His bright future vanished in an instant, leaving behind only his music and the haunting thought of what could have been. 15. Hal Kemp. Music was smooth and polished, different from the loud swing of his time. Hal Kemp had a special talent for melody. Born in North Carolina in the early 1900s, his band became popular in the 1930s with songs like Got a Date with an Angel and There's a Small Hotel. The soft instruments, gentle brass, and careful arrangements made his orchestra stand out. His music mixed jazz and pop, creating a refined and elegant sound. But fame could not protect him from tragedy. On a cold December night in the early 1940s, Kemp's life came to a sudden end. While driving on a foggy California road, he did not see the danger ahead. His car crashed head-on with another vehicle, leaving it wrecked beyond recognition. The impact broke his ribs, punctured his lungs, and left him critically injured. Rescuers rushed him to the hospital, but his condition was severe. Doctors did their best to save him, but the injuries were too much. Medicine at the time could only do so much. As infection spread, his body grew weaker. Within 2 days, the jazz world lost one of its greatest band leaders. He was still young, with many years of music ahead of him, but his life was cut short. His orchestra tried to continue without him, but the music lost its magic. Over time, his name faded from memory as louder and faster music took over. Still, his music lives on. The soft, graceful sound he created influenced musicians who came after him. Though few remember his name today, his melodies remain a part of jazz history. If things had turned out differently, what other beautiful songs might he have given the world? 16. Al Hibbler had a voice like no other, deep, rough, and full of feeling. Al Hibbler, blind since birth, saw the world through music. Born in Mississippi in the early 1900s, he became famous singing with Duke Ellington's orchestra. His songs like Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me mixed jazz and blues in a way that touched people's hearts. His music still echoes today. For over 60 years, he sang with the best, made history, and fought for civil rights. But time catches up with everyone. In the 21st century, the world lost him in a sudden, tragic way. The details of his last day are unclear, like a forgotten song. In Chicago, a city he knew well, he was in a car accident. Some say he was a passenger. Others believe he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What is certain is that the crash took his life, ending a voice that had meant so much to so many. He lived into his 80s, still singing, still moving people with his voice. But even legends are not safe from everyday dangers. A car, a moment, and he was gone. Yet, death could not silence him. His music lives on, inspiring singers who dream of capturing even a piece of his soul. And beyond music, his fight for justice is part of history. He marched, he protested, he was arrested for what he believed in. His voice was more than music. It was power. The road where he died is just another street now, with cars rushing by. But his songs, they still play. His voice, it still reaches us. And somewhere, in a quiet jazz club or on an old record, Al Hibbler is still singing. But what really happened in those last moments? No one knows for sure. Some stories fade, but his voice never will. 17. Harry Carney changed the way people thought about the baritone saxophone. Harry Carney took an instrument that was just part of the background in big band music and made it stand out. Born in the early 1900s, he was a musical prodigy, playing many instruments before choosing the baritone sax. By his teenage years, he had joined Duke Ellington's orchestra, beginning a partnership that would last nearly 50 years. Carney had a special way of playing. His deep, rich sound gave weight to songs like Mood Indigo and Sophisticated Lady. Every note he played was full of meaning. But after Ellington died, something changed. Carney, who had filled the world with music, grew quiet, and just 5 months later, his music stopped for good. One day in October, Carney was driving when he lost control of his car. The crash was fatal. Some say it was a tragic accident, but others wonder if grief had played a role. He had once said he never wanted to live long after Ellington was gone. Could his words have come true in the worst way? His death was more than just the loss of one man. It marked the end of an era. He had been the longest-serving member of Ellington's band, and now his sax was forever silent. But even today, his recordings live on, inspiring every baritone sax player who follows in his footsteps. 18. Jess Stacy. Fingers once flew over piano keys, bringing jazz to life with both skill and passion. Jess Stacy mixed classical music with the energy of swing, making his style unforgettable. Born in the early 1900s, he rose to fame in Chicago's jazz clubs before joining Benny Goodman's orchestra. His solo in Sing, Sing, Sing at Carnegie Hall in the 1930s became legendary, freezing time in a moment of musical brilliance. As the years passed, Stacy stepped away from the spotlight. He left the fast-paced world of jazz to live a quiet life in California. He had played his part in music history and seemed ready for a peaceful retirement. But fate had other plans. In his 90s, Stacy suffered a fall at home. It seemed like a small accident, but it proved deadly. The details are unclear. Did he break a bone, hit his head, or suffer internal injuries? Whatever happened, it was enough to take his life. The man who had once filled grand concert halls with his music was gone. Stacy's death was a sad reminder of how fragile life can be. He had helped shape the swing era, but in the end, something as simple as a fall took him away. Though the golden age of swing had faded, his music remained, whispering stories of a time when jazz ruled the world. Two great musicians, two tragic endings. Jazz has lost many legends to time, but some losses leave an emptiness that can never be filled. How many more forgotten stories wait to be rediscovered in the echoes of jazz history? 20. Jimmy Blanton changed jazz forever with his bass playing. Jimmy Blanton was born in the early 1900s, joined Duke Ellington's orchestra, and did something no one had done before. He turned the bass into a lead instrument. Before Blanton, the bass mostly kept the rhythm, playing simple notes to keep time. But he had bigger ideas. His playing was smooth, creative, and full of life, making the bass more than just a background instrument. Blanton's style was groundbreaking. He played notes that were more complex, adding new harmonies and improvising in ways no bassist had before. People who heard him live knew they were listening to something special. In just a few years, he changed how people thought about the bass in jazz, but his time was short. In 1942, tragedy struck. A car accident ended his life when he was only 23. He had already changed jazz, but no one knows what more he could have done if he had lived longer. His sudden death shocked the jazz world. He wasn't just another musician, He was a genius with limitless potential. His death reminded many of the dangers of life on the road, where musicians traveled constantly, facing risks every day. Even though he was gone too soon, his music still lives on. His recordings continue to inspire bass players today. Musicians like Charles Mingus and Ray Brown built on his ideas, taking the bass even further. Blanton's story is one of great talent and great loss, but his influence on jazz will never be forgotten.